Welcome back to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we've got a handful of things to get into. But before we get started, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to become one of the biggest pages on YouTube when it comes to covering the Magic. So remember to hit that like button and hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. Today is an ultimate glazing day for the Orlando Magic. I'm going to be honest with y'all. We've been on this train for a little while over the last couple of episodes, and it is continuing to roll on the tracks. In this episode, we're going to talk about how Jaylen Suggs was chosen by Bleacher Report writers as a sleeper pick for DPOY this upcoming season. They specifically said only 3 perimeter players have picked up a Defensive Player of the Year victory since 2000. Metta World Peace, Kawhi Leonard 2 times, and Marcus Smart. Suggs' intensity is cut from the same mold, and the Magic now have just enough national TV exposure for people to take notice of their top 5 defense. I've been saying this for the longest time. Jaylen Suggs is one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. When healthy, he is an auto first-team all-defensive player. He is the guy that's taking the baton from Drew Holiday, I believe, as the next up-and-coming perimeter defender that everybody talks about as the hardest guy to get past, the hardest guy in the trenches to be able to score a bucket on. Drew Holiday has had that title for the longest of being this quote-unquote underrated defender, this guy that you put in the pocket of, a dude who is not talked about as a superstar caliber player, all-star caliber player, but does everything that is required of him at the position to be a high-level contributor to a championship caliber team. That is Jaylen Suggs in a vacuum. And Jaylen Suggs will be taking that mantra away from Drew Holiday very, very soon. Given the fact that Drew Holiday, let's be honest, probably has 1 or 2 more seasons left in the NBA, and definitely at least maybe this being his last real efficient season as a high-level defender. He's always been a big-time defender across the board, even dating back to his early years coming out of UCLA. But I think at the end of the day, Jaylen Suggs now, with his athleticism, his overall range as a defender, guarding 1s and 2s, can guard 3s in certain pinches, is going to be a guy that's going to be very special this year in particular now that the offensive load is going to be more spread out. I think he's going to have more of an opportunity to show his offensive chops, but defensively, I think now with this group having a much more effective offensive game, he can put much more energy on the defensive side of the ball, which is going to make him, again, one of the better lockdown defenders in the league. I think when you look at guys like Alex Caruso or Luguentz Dort for the Oklahoma City Thunder and how they get so much love for being great on-ball defenders or great free safety style defenders. If you're talking about somebody more like Alex Caruso, when you look at Luguentz Dort, he's maybe the best defender in a phone booth in terms of guarding a guy one-on-one. I think Jaylen Suggs has a great combination of both of those things, which is going to give him a really good opportunity to win DPOY. I'm glad they picked him as a sleeper. I think he's a guy that, I think when we talked about our DPOY odds, he was a guy that was on the outside of the top 5. That would put him in sleeper range. Don't be surprised if the odds on Jaylen Suggs slowly but surely start to change as we get closer to the beginning of the year. This is a guy that's going to be special on defense this year. Again, all he's going to have to do is guard like a maniac, which we know he can do, and shoot the 3 ball at a high clip. We have guys like Tyus Jones to be able to help with facilitation. We have guys like Desmond Bane to take on more on-ball responsibility. Obviously, we know what Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner do in terms of what they provide on the offensive end. If Jaylen Suggs can be a defensive, not trendsetter, if Jaylen Suggs can be a self-starter, push-start car on defense, and use that in a way that permeates throughout the rest of the other guys on the team, as we've seen in the past, this team is going to maintain its top 5 status in defense, both in opponents' points per game and overall defensive value. And if they're a top 5 defense with him at the helm, and this team is top 3 in the Eastern Conference, like it says even in the Bleacher Report article, this team is going to get more national recognition this season than it's ever had over the last 10 years. Jaylen Suggs being at the top of the DPOY list is something that could be very, very viable if they are able to maintain that top 5 defense and be, if they're able to ball out in some of these bigger games. Again, they have 14 nationally televised games this year, and 2 of them are overseas. Very good opportunities to have all the eyeballs on you in a real way where you can show off that top 5 defense and show why, similar to Marcus Smart, who did it the most recently, that being one of the better teams in the East and being the linchpin of a defense that elite can get you an award like this one. Let's move on to another big-time award status, which is All-Star, where NBA.com stated that they believe that this year, Franz Wagner will for sure be a first-time All-Star. They say teammate Paulo Banchero broke through as an All-Star in 2024, and Wagner could do the same this season. He scores enough with 24.2 points per game last season, but needs to hike his accuracy after 29.5% of his three-pointers, including 7 of 37 in the first round versus Boston. The versatile 6'10" wing just turned 24 this week. Shout out to Franz Wagner once again. And both Orlando and he are poised for a big improvement. Again, let's talk about what Franz Wagner can do. We've said this on a multitude of different occasions. I'm going to reiterate it one more time. Franz Wagner just has to be a 35% three-point shooter to become the most dangerous forward in the Eastern Conference behind guys like Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, right? Once you get him to 35% three-point shooting with what he's already been able to effectively do offensively on ball, he is a top 5 forward in the Eastern Conference. I feel like comfortably a top 5 forward in the Eastern Conference if he can get up to 35%. Because like as the article states, 24 points per game while shooting less than 30% from beyond the arc. While playing on a team that was zapped of any version of spacing when they found out Kentavious Caldwell-Pope apparently for a year forgot how to shoot. In a year where Jaylen Suggs missed the majority of the season and a 40% three-point shooter was now no longer on the floor to add spacing. Franz Wagner, if he becomes an average shooter, league average is 35 to 36%. I believe it's 35.6 to 36.4% is league average now in today's NBA. If he can be a league average three-point shooter with the volume that he already is taking, which was nearly 7 attempts per game last year, and pair that what he has developed over the last 3 seasons as an on-ball threat, Franz Wagner will be an all-star this season. People are jumping on the bandwagon. I've been warning people for the last couple of weeks. Join the bandwagon now, because once the season starts, we're not going to want to hear that chirping of, oh, Orlando Magic this, oh, Orlando Magic. No. Us Magic fans have already known. Us Magic fans have already been aware that these guys are poised to make the kind of leap that they are set from with some of the moves that we've seen, acquiring Desmond Bane, getting Jaylen Suggs back healthy, bringing in Tyus Jones, seeing what Franz Wagner has been able to develop more within the Eurobasket League, right? These are the different things that are going to add to why Orlando was going to be so dangerous paired with the state of the Eastern Conference right now. They are primed for a really good spot. I believe that this is going to be a very solid season for Franz Wagner. Do not be surprised if he's a guy who averages 27 points per game. That's only a 3-point jump. That's one more three-pointer made per game than he made last season. He could average 27 points per game on this team, even with Desmond Bane, even with Paulo Banchero on this team. I see a world where the Orlando Magic could efficiently run an offense where we have 3 20-point per game scorers: Desmond Bane, Paulo Banchero, and Franz Wagner, all on the team. All on the team has 3 20-point per game scores. I think there's a real high ceiling for that as well. And if he averages 27 points per game, shoots 35% from beyond the arc, and is on one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, he's going to be a first-time All-Star. Period, point blank. Let's talk about one of the biggest acquisitions of the offseason that didn't get talked about enough in national media, being Tyus Jones, my favorite backup point guard in the league. Tyus Jones was a guy that, going all the way back to the beginning of free agency, I said was my number 1 target for the Orlando Magic. The number 1 free agent target of anybody on the market based off the financials of the Orlando Magic going into the offseason. Tyus Jones was my number 1 option, and they were able to sign him to a calm 1-year deal to be a calming presence, a veteran presence, an established backup point guard, and someone whose skill set is not to overtake the ball, not to create his own offense, not to put himself in position to be heliocentric, right? A la some of the other point guards that we have been in conversations with in the past: Anthony Simons, LaMelo Ball, Darius Garland. Not that, but a guy who can come in and be a table setter. He's a guy who adds to their three-point shooting acumen as a dude who's coming off of a 40% three-point shooting year. He is a guy who is a table setter in the mold of your traditional point guards, the Rondos, the Chris Pauls, and maybe not as an elite of a passer, of course not, but in terms of being a decision maker, a basketball IQ savant, Tyus Jones is in that class of backup point guards. He is in that class of point guards in general when it comes to being a high-level decision maker with the basketball. He can be a 40% three-point shooter for you and be a table setter on offense to get easier looks for Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Desmond Bane, Wendell Carter, Anthony Black, so on and so forth. The goal for Tyus Jones is to average 5 assists per game. 5 to 6 assists per game and 25 minutes per game off the bench as a guy who simply just makes sure this team runs, the engine for this team runs smoothly. The goal of this year not only is to crack the top 15 offensively, but is to do so in a way that's much more efficient than simply Franz Wagner and Paulo Banchero bully balling their way to the basket, settling for mid-range jumpers. The idea for this offseason, particularly when you add some of the coaching changes they made this summer, was to acquire a more digestible offense in a way that things become much more efficient, creates easier looks, easier baskets, and now makes it, again, even simpler for guys like Jaylen Suggs, even Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner to lock in more defensively for a team that already was a top 5 defense with those guys shouldering so much of the load on the offensive end. Tyus Jones is going to be a table setter. I got this article from, I believe it was a fan-sided article that went down and talked about each underrated signing of the Southeast Division. Tyus Jones, of course, is a conversation that is not going to be had in the national media because Tyus Jones is essentially going to act as the Orlando Magic's Mike Conley for the Minnesota Timberwolves, as that guy that's just the humbling force that comes in. Obviously, Mike Conley starts for this team. That could soon change with the emergence of Robert Dillingham, but neither here nor there. As this calming force next to Anthony Edwards that allows for easier decision-making and opens the floor up for Anthony Edwards to play with a more free mindset on both ends of the floor. That is a similar presence that Tyus Jones is meant to bring. Not the most flashy thing, not something that's going to catch a lot of national headlines, but if this guy averages 7, 8, 9 points a game, let's say 9 points a game, that's 3 threes made per game. Let's say he averages 9 to 12 points per game, that's 3 or 4 threes made per game, paired with 5 assists off the bench, right? One in transition, 2 or 3 in the half court, one in a off the catch situation in the half court presence, something of that nature. But 4 to 5 assists off the bench paired with 9 to 12 points off the bench. That's 3 to 4 threes made and 5 created baskets. That is a small but yet heavily effective play style for a player like this that can then juice up the offense, because all you need is a handful of knockdown threes and a couple of easy baskets, and the team's offense starts to run almost in autopilot. That's what Tyus Jones brings to the table for this squad, and I think that the fan-sided article was cooking a little bit when it came to that, because I'm gonna be honest with you, this guy is going to be someone that is not going to get talked about a ton this season, but I think it's going to have a lot to do with the win total change for the Orlando Magic this upcoming year. And yes, of course, the East is in a weird situation right now, but I think the acquisitions that the Orlando Magic made on the margins this summer were going to make them a top team in the Eastern Conference, even if some of these injuries didn't occur. I believe the Orlando Magic are positioning themselves to be a top 5 team in the Eastern Conference down the line, not simply just this season, but the success of this season, the success of this season is going to be a tone setter for where the Orlando Magic stand in the hierarchy of the East when those other teams, the Boston Celtics, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Indiana Pacers, all kind of are able to reset themselves in a real way, if they can. Obviously, Jason Tatum has to come back healthy. Indiana Pacers have to get Tyrese Halliburton back healthy. The state of Giannis Antetokounmpo with the Milwaukee Bucks feels relatively safe, given the fact that they signed Thanasis Antetokounmpo to another 1-year deal. So it seems as though Giannis will be there to stay at least for 1 more year. We'll see how that goes going into next season, obviously. But the Orlando Magic are primed to have a big-time year. I think Tyus Jones is going to be one of the lower discussed individuals when it comes to the success of this team if they're a top 3 seed this year. But he's going to be one of the bigger pillars on the team when we actually talk about true impact by season's end. I feel confident in that. And today we're not going to end with the question of the day because I saw a really interesting Bleacher Report article and I want to discuss it because this name has came up again. We've discussed this on the podcast before, the name Malik Monk. And in this report, there is a report / prediction from Bleacher Report that says the Sacramento Kings will be looking to ship Malik Monk to a team to a team at the trade deadline. The name that came up at the top of the list was the Orlando Magic. And the trade involves the Sacramento Kings giving the Orlando Magic the Malik Monk along with a 2031 first round pick. Mind you, Orlando would be receiving this first round pick for simply Anthony Black and Jet Howard. Done. Done deal. Thank you. Thank you for your services. Love Anthony Black as a backup point guard. Think he can be special. I've said it on this podcast a handful of times that from an X factor perspective, him as a backup point guard could be huge for what he provides defensively. Jet Howard, I've made my piece very clear with him in terms of my personal opinion that I believe that Jace Richardson is a better prospect than him. He is going to be cheaper long term than Jet Howard, who needs to be paid. He is a guy that is going to be able to provide similar, if not an enhanced version of what Jet Howard was brought onto the roster to provide. And I think that long-term, Jace Richardson has a higher ceiling than Jet Howard. Anthony Black, his production can be replaced via the depth that we have at point guard right now. Again, Tyus Jones, Desmond Bane can play backup point guard in situations. Jaylen Suggs, obviously. In this trade, we also would get Malik Monk, who can be a lead initiator on the offensive end. And although, yes, it takes away from our our perimeter defense, again, we were a top 5 defense last season with Jaylen Suggs missing most of the year. So we don't need a defensive specialist point guard as much as we need a self-shot creating point guard off the bench or self-shot creating guard off the bench. Again, we do not have the 2 guard position off the bench completely shouldered up yet. Like that one's not completely shored all the way up yet in terms of who the definitive backup shooting guard is. I believe it should be Jace Richardson, who just comes off the bench as the shooting guard, or you start Anthony Black at the 2 for defensive purposes and you start Jace Richardson at the 1. But we do not have a true shooting guard on the roster to back up Desmond Bane. And primarily when we're talking about creating instant offense off the bench, your typical 6-man of the year type of candidate, Malik Monk obviously is a 6-man of the year candidate and guy who's been successful in that conversation more than once, is a guy that perfectly fits the section of what Orlando is missing in a real way. So I believe that the Orlando Magic are positioning themselves to really bolster their offense even further for a team that, again, has never been in the top 15 over the last 10 years, has not been a top 10 offense in the last 10 years. If you tell me we get Malik Monk and a first-round pick, we get Malik Monk and a first for Anthony Black and Jet Howard, I'll sign the dotted lines. I will sign them personally, myself. You guys let me know in the comment section down below how you guys feel about this Malik Monk trade. This trade in particular, we've talked about Malik Monk to the Orlando Magic before, but this trade package in particular is one that I feel like is a win-win pretty calmly because they get 2 young guards to make up for the fact that this is a team that's going to be hitting the reset button on guys like Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan very, very soon. And I think that adding a player like Malik Monk adds to an offense that we desperately do need in terms of shot creation off the bench. Otherwise, we're always going to have to run units that desperately rely on having either Paolo Banchero, Franz, Wagner, or Desmond Bane on the floor at all times. And yes, there will be situations where you need a combination of those guys to play, but the desperation to need those guys on the floor for offense versus the luxury of having the ability to interchange those guys out, that's different. Malik Monk is an instant offensive guy off the bench who can give you 12, 15 points kind of in his sleep. And if you add that to a team that already has these elite scorers in Franz, Paolo, and Desmond Bane, this team's going to be one of the top scoring offenses in the league. And that combination with that combination of that and already a top 5 defense, we already know the formula for a championship team. Top 10 defense, top 10 offense. If this team can be a top 10 offense and a top 5 defense, the formula is there. We have an all-star caliber player that can be an MVP. We have a secondary all-star, a 6-man of the year. The Boston Celtics had that, and they won a championship. Just last season, The Oklahoma City Thunder had an MVP caliber player, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. All-star backup guy. All-star secondary option. Let me not disrespect Jalen Williams. All-star secondary option, Jalen Williams. Sixth Man of the Year candidate, Alex Caruso. Won a championship. Sneaky move to get Malik Monk. I think the Orlando Magic should pull the trigger if this is the trade package they get. But with that being said, this has been another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. I will be back with you guys tomorrow for some more stuff. But until then, peace.